Welcome. I'm Wendy Edelberg, Director of the Hamilton Project. There are urgent issues in real estate. Rising housing costs have outpaced wage growth in many regions, making it increasingly difficult for low and middle income families to secure housing. There's simply not enough housing available, and this lack of supply is helping to make rental housing in particular unaffordable. At the same time, the post-COVID transition to remote and hybrid work has upended the commercial real estate market. High vacancy rates are posing challenges for cities across the country. This opens an opportunity for us to rethink U.S. housing policy for renters. Today, the Hamilton Project releases 2 proposals aimed at addressing these challenges. The first one takes aim at the shortage of housing and the oversupply of offices, along with a third goal, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Arpit Gupta, Candy Martinez, and Stijn van Nieuwerburgh offer a real how-to on converting less environmentally friendly office buildings into green apartments. Under their criteria, about 9% of all office buildings across the US are physically eligible for conversion. An interactive calculator on our website allows you to determine which conversions are financially viable without any government help. Some conversions, however, particularly those with affordable units and with greener upgrades, will require subsidies to be financially viable. The proposal highlights how the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, could be a source of those subsidies. The interactive calculator will help developers, local officials, and policymakers to figure out how big that subsidy would need to be, project by project. Today, Stijn will discuss conversions with Tracy from Brookings Metro and Vincent Reina from the White House's Domestic Policy Council, which is currently working on ways to stimulate these conversions. Another proposal out this morning by Laurie, Goodman, and Ingrid, Gould, and Ellen takes a close look at the single-family rental market. The growing presence of institutional investors in that market has generated attention and concern in recent years. Laurie and Ingrid pulled together evidence about how institutions help protect tenants and potential owners, such as rental registries and improvements to renovation financing. They also suggest imposing more requirements on large investors who, due to their size and capacity, can be asked to do more to serve and protect tenant interests. Laurie and Ingrid will both be joining to share their insight on the single-family rental market, and I'll be back to moderate that conversation. But first, we have a fireside chat between Mayor Randall Woodfin of Birmingham, Alabama, and Emily Badger of the New York Times. If you have questions for speakers throughout today's event, you can email them to us at info@hamiltonproject.org. And with that, I will turn things over to Emily Badger.
Thank you, Wendy. And I think Mayor Woodfin is here as well. Hi, Mayor. It's nice to meet you.
Hey, good morning, Emily. Good.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with Mayor Woodfin, he's been the mayor in Birmingham since 2017 and really came into office and was elected on a mandate of talking a lot about revitalizing all 99 neighborhoods in the city. And this is something that's still central to his agenda. And I think as probably everyone who's participating in this event can appreciate, like that is a goal that is absolutely inseparable from the housing market and from dealing with challenges in the housing market. So he and I are going to talk a fair amount about some of the ideas and issues that are going to come up later in the event and in the context of the academic papers, but about how they're playing out on the ground in a specific city and from the point of view of a mayor. So Mayor Woodfin, I wanted to ask you to start by sort of situating Birmingham for us in the national broader context of a national housing shortage, a housing affordability shortage. Birmingham is not Washington, D.C., where I'm sitting. It's not New York, where, several of the other panelists are sitting. It's not Austin. It doesn't have this sort of superheated rental market. It doesn't have the pressures of population growth, but these underlying problems of a housing shortage, of cost burdens on renters that are really, reaching new highs. Those problems still show up there. They just may show up looking a little bit different in a post-industrial city than they do in some of these other, very high cost cities. So could you just sort of, put us on the ground in Birmingham with you and tell us a little bit about like what do the challenges look like there when you're thinking in particular about housing supply and quality housing, in particular for your residents who are renters and who may feel like homeownership is not an option to them right now.
Well, thank you, Emily. Good morning to you, to the Hamilton Project, and to Brookings. I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you and the audience before us. I can also say I think there are a lot of smarter people who are well more versed in this topic that could be here. So I appreciate the opportunity. With that said, if you are a mayor of any urban core in the entire nation, at whatever level it is, high, medium, or small, we're all dealing with the issue you described and painted so well. And so just to provide a little bit more context for the city of Birmingham, the crisis in the commercial real estate market here is not the greatest challenge, if I'm being honest, for our city and community when it comes to housing alternatives. However, we have pointed out that, Birmingham faces a primary challenge of pockets of blight and abandonment in our outlying neighborhoods versus downtown, where we've seen renters be priced out, not just in Birmingham, but across the nation. But related to our downtown housing, we have seen an influx of wealth, which can, I believe, pull from the surrounding neighborhoods. And the rental market sees a significant sum of household income that is spent on housing. I think it's ridiculous. More than half spend 30% of their income or plus. So the key emphasis on plus, because a lot of the renters here are spending well north of 30% of their income to provide for their rent. But we are fortunate because through projects like the Choice Neighborhood Grant that we received $50 million for mixed use of affordable and market housing, which a significant amount will be rental right abut our downtown neighborhood, as well as an area called Southtown. We're doing a revitalization project there for affordable housing as well. What the city of Birmingham is doing is focusing on revitalization that creates mixed use opportunities. We believe that's our best fight to balance the market as it relates to renters being able to participate. We've also reimagining former school properties. For example, a school on the west side of town called Inslee High School that's been vacant, I want to say since about 2002, if I'm correct. But this is another example of development where it'll be for affordable housing. But I think one of the things I'm most excited about for us is that we established an affordable housing trust fund using our American Rescue Plan dollars. This allows us to spur growth. We still need state support, enabling legislation to be able to use that money at the local level. But the things I've just described, these are things we're trying to do to offset the high increase in rising rental costs, and the balance we think should be leveraged for us with local dollars to support those who want to participate in the rental market here in Birmingham.
You touched on a couple things that I want to come back to a little bit later, but one of them is that you mentioned that what's happening in your downtown is notably different from what's happening in several of your surrounding neighborhoods. And I've read you describing some of the challenges that you have in those outlying neighborhoods as sort of snaggletooth neighborhoods, meaning that what's happening on one parcel is different from what's happening on the next parcel, and maybe you've got vacancies or you've got blight. Would you describe a little bit for us like what that looks like and what you have tried to do about it? Because part of the of the challenge of the housing market for you is that you've got a lot of old housing stock and it's not in great condition, and that can contribute to having a shortage of housing even in a market that we don't think of as being as high cost as many other places.
Absolutely. I think the frame I can share for the audience that's present this morning is, Birmingham's height population, I would say in the late 70s, was about 340,000 residents. Today, from the 2020 census, we are right at 200,000 residents. And so that is a significant decrease in population for a post-industrial city. With that, we inherited all type of problems that included just, I would say, flat out abandonment of those who own homes and just walked away. I would say a lot of homeowners did not have a will or a trust, and a lot of properties have been caught up in the web of who owns the property and nobody's taking care of it. And so those blighted structures, those blighted properties saw a significant increase in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and now in the 2020 era, we've been intentional about addressing what to do about that. And so we've addressed this issue several fold. The first thing we did, and this is not something I'm bragging about, this is not something I'm excited about, because that's cost taxpayers millions of dollars, actually. But we went in and we spent millions on just blight removal, literally getting rid of the blighted structure that was either burned out or the roof caved in or something of that nature. But with that, removing that structure, unfortunately, the notion of a snag-a-tooth neighborhood came to play, because you would have a home, and then the lot next to it, you wouldn't have a home. It would be just an empty lot. And on the other side of that lot was another home, and then on the other side of that home was an empty lot. And that's the whole notion of snag-a-tooth. And so then it becomes about, well, what are the solutions to go vertical with single family homes now that you've removed the blight on that empty lot? And for us, we partnered with our Jefferson County legislators to create a land bank. So we now have a land bank that allows us to kickstart and spur growth and find ways to get these empty lots back into use, reimagine what should be on these empty lots, and then to be in a position to go vertical with single family homes on these empty lots in partnership with private developers, as well as what's our responsibility at City Hall in support of our land bank and accelerating growth to get rid of snag-a-tooth neighborhoods. So in decreasing one problem of the actual blighted structure, unfortunately, we created another problem of empty lots. And so it has been our focus to support our land bank in partnership with private developers to go vertical with more single family homes.
And do you think of those policies as sort of trying to buttress the wealth building of the existing homeowners who are there? Because obviously vacant properties blight are, they're destroying the wealth contained in the housing of people who continue to live there, people who have built it up. And so it's potentially a set of policies that could do multiple things at one time, both sort of supporting people who already own homes as well as trying to create more new housing.
Well, the short answer is yes, right? That's the best way to answer that question. But if I was to provide you any detail, when we think about the existing homeowner that's to the left and the right of that blighted structure, or now today's empty lot, the whole notion is, how can we support them? And so let's put a pause on policy and just ask a simple question. What's the city's role, or what can be our role in supporting those homeowners? Well, we created a program that we've been able to leverage federal dollars from, as well as using our local dollars for a home repair program. That program has also it's also a genuine public-private partnership with corporate Birmingham to help existing homeowners rehab their roof or rehab their porch, or paint for their exterior of their home and things of that nature, or for those who are elder who have had increased in age, there's something need to be converted to make sure they can actually get to and from their home in a way that keeps them safe, whether they need to use a walker or anything of that nature. So for us, it's not just been about that empty lot that the city is now in ownership of through the land bank, but also how can we support the existing homeowners? In addition to that, what we've also done is create programs and allow residents to come in and free of charge to them. We've partnered with our legal community to offer free clinics as it relates to wills, trusts, and estates to help citizens create something. So if and when there's a transition, that the home actually passes to someone in the next generation that can actually be responsible for taking care of it, so it doesn't go into despair or blight as well.
Mm. You mentioned that, you know, the goal with the land bank and what you're trying to do with these vacant parcels is to ultimately, hopefully one day put single family homes on them. I'm guessing that the vast majority of the discussion in Birmingham about adding new housing stock, including, you know, addressing affordable rentals, we're really talking about single family homes there significantly more than multifamily. Is that right?
It depends on which side of town. We acknowledge that I would say probably about 95 of the 99 neighborhoods, definitely single family. And then the other 4, which includes downtown, south side, and a few other areas that is adjacent to our city center, multifamily. But I want to be honest with everybody here. I think it's real easy to get caught up and say it needs to be single family or multifamily. I think in between, we need to be, what does duplexes look like? What does triplexes look like? And, you know, not the visual of what we know the traditional duplexes and triplexes to look like, but getting creative in additional forms of housing outside of single family only or multifamily only. And that's the space that I have charged my community development department to get super, super creative in, because, you know, multi-use in a neighborhood that's majority single family, if you have several lots that have had blighted structures now removed, maybe you can do something outside of single family, but that still supports the fabric and makeup of the neighborhood.
Is it legal to do that in much of Birmingham? To build these other kinds of housing types that you're talking about, to combine parcels, to put mixed use things in neighborhoods primarily been, I mean,
so
you need to do some other work before you get to being able to do that work.
Yes and no. The no part is what I just said, that requires not just creativity, but it requires us to engage the following: our legal department, zoning, as well as the city council to approve mixed use and repurpose of existing sites and land that are zoned currently single family. But what does it look like in the area if you want to convert to duplexes, triplexes, etc.?
One of the things that we're going to hear more about a little later in the event today is specifically thinking about single family renters and single family rental properties and institutional ownership of those kinds of properties, which we've seen this growth of since the housing bubble. And we know that this is particularly prominent in the Southeast. Birmingham, I believe, is a region, that has sort of more than the typical share of institutional investors in the rental market for single family homes. Do you perceive or feel that to be creating negative externalities for your community? Does it come with benefits? I mean, there's a lot of fear that in a really tight market for home buyers, as an individual family trying to become a first-time home buyer, you don't want to be competing with an institutional investor. But there's also the possibility that sort of larger investors in the single family market can enable renter households to move into neighborhoods that hadn't been accessible to them in the past. Some hope, which I think we're going to talk more about later, that, these are actors who could, be forced to behave in a way that's providing better maintenance of properties and being more responsible towards renters than we're able to monitor with mom and pop landlords. Well, one, have you seen that activity grow in your time in Birmingham? Do you feel like you can see it, you feel it, you hear about it from your residents?
So yes, yes, yes. I feel it. I hear about it, and it is part of the discussion. I think your term was institutional investors. Oh, that's such a cool way to say it. But on the ground, I think people feel some type of way about it, right? That they're afraid of people buying property in bulk and then sitting on it and it getting dilapidated, and or buying property in bulk and then pricing out existing people that live there, and or words like gentrification, et cetera, right? So these are legitimate concerns on the ground. I think for us, what is the city's role? I go back to our land bank, and I have vivid memories of organizations coming to the city of Birmingham and saying they want to buy some of these empty lots in bulk. And then when we peel back the layers of what they wanted to do and asking hard questions, turns out a lot of them just wanted to sit on the properties, right? They had no interest in going vertical with more single family homes, whether they were for rent or for purchase right away. They wanted to sit on them for 2 or 3 years. And so for us, if an institutional investor, i.e. an organization, comes in and say, we want to buy bulk, what I've charged our community development department to do, as well as those who lead our land bank to do, is create a memorandum of understanding and a contract that allows clawbacks for anything we feel infringes upon that would be detrimental to the actual neighborhood of one, either pricing people out or folks just sitting on the land, not doing anything to spur development, and literally within our contract, clawback, get this land back if developer doesn't follow ABC, and or if they just sit on the property for this long. So through what we're doing through our laws, our local laws, and our local incentive agreements, particularly if they request local funding via tax dollars, is you have to do A, you have to do B, you have to do C. Oh, and by the way, A, B, and C should include these things. And if you don't do this, then you are in breach of our agreement. One, you won't get city tax dollars, and two, we may just take the land back. And that's our way of offsetting and, I guess, course correcting institutional investors who want to swoop in and just buy land in bulk.
Can you perceive of those actors in the housing market as contributing something positive to Birmingham and helping you sort of solve some of the challenges that you have? I mean, so that's sort of a different question from like, how do you mitigate the harm that people fear is caused by them, to like, could you leverage them to, you know, help you actively pursue your own housing agenda and your residents' own agenda?
Yes, I think that requires a compelling vision from not just me, but any mayor, that this is our vision and these are our goals as it relates to affordable housing, market rate housing, attainable housing, workforce housing in our communities. This is what we seek. This is what we're looking for. This is the type of organizations we want to partner with. And these are the type of resources the city is offering in return to partner with this private organization. Mm-hmm. From that standpoint, I think it requires consistent follow-up and accountability through both parties. So, for example, right now on the western side of town, we're partnering with an organization called NCRC Growth. And it is leveraging a host of partners, local banks through CRA, private developers, as well as city tax dollars. There's land that they have identified in bulk in one community that they're going vertical with about 25 single family housing units. They're doing it on two other sides of town as well. But this was a sample model to see if this partnership can work, and what does a public-private partnership look like for those who want to come in, but actually be beneficial and positive to the community, not hurt the community, not price existing people out who've been there 30, 40 years. And the model with NCRC Growth has worked. it has worked so well. Again, we're taking that model and we're doing it on two other sides of town where we got land in bulk and we're giving it to them to go vertical with more single family homes.
Pursuing a model like that, do you feel like you have the capacity locally in Birmingham, whether that's community development organizations that are local to the city, affordable housing developers, even market rate developers? I mean, is that ecosystem all there? Do you need to grow that ecosystem? Do you have to deal frequently with those actors coming in from outside of Birmingham because the expertise is elsewhere?
Yeah, so I would say, again, the answer, I want to give you a short answer first. To your question, the answer is yes and no. Capacity wise, I do feel that what we've built and created over the last 6 years, as well as the people that's leading the effort, I have full confidence and trust in them to have built an ecosystem that supports what we want to do, honestly, in genuine public-private partnership to spur growth, whether it is affordable and or market, as well as rental and or purchase. But it's in pockets. That's one. Two, related to those who want to swoop in and see Birmingham's, I guess, take advantage of Birmingham's market. I will be honest with you, probably about 4 years ago, we just shut down. We were gun shy. But with some of the dollars we've been able to leverage with ARPA, some of the dollars we will leverage with the Choice Grant, and some of the other funding sources we've been able to take advantage of, we're now saying, dear private developers, these are the assets that exist in the city of Birmingham. Here are opportunities in the city of Birmingham. We would like to partner with you. In our partnership, here's what we would like to see. And if you can provide these things in exchange, then the city of Birmingham can come to the table to offset costs as it relates and expedite process to speed up the opportunity for a person to be a homeowner and or a renter.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about, I mean, the other big topic that we're going to hear about later during this event is, specifically repurposing of buildings that have, no longer make sense in the use that they've had for the last 30, 40 years. Is when you think about assets like that you have in Birmingham, to what extent are they offices, or, to what extent are we talking there about other kinds of buildings that are part of the industrial legacy of Birmingham? Maybe they're not literally offices, they're related to factories or other kinds of industrial uses that have more environmental contamination that you have to deal with. Like, what is when you are sort of surveying the land in Birmingham and you're trying to think about, here are these buildings that don't serve the purpose they used to anymore, maybe they're vacant or they're almost vacant, like what are those buildings? What is it that you have to work with there?
So the city of Birmingham does not have a shortage as it relates to surplus property that can be reused or repurposed. I think, again, a post-industrial city where suburbia flight existed in droves in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of our city center was left empty. The first thing we've done, some key points for us, is that we looked at how could we leverage existing assets. So vacant land, or in your question, commercial assets that needed to be reimagined. And it wasn't just about offering incentives for attracting development and or encouraging types of investment that these buildings needed. We needed to find a way to seek innovative funding mechanisms for the repurpose of commercial use. So I told you about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund a few minutes ago. And that's going to allow us to be creative with financing to convert this commercial space to affordable units. But in addition to that, the state of Alabama, how do we get creative with tax credits? And we believe that's been critical to support sustainable financing for the repurpose of these commercial buildings. Now I got a note here. I need to pull it up because I don't want to forget it. In 2015, we made several changes to our zoning ordinance. And that made way for mixed use districts that allowed for more flexibility related to zoning development for mixed use developments. Thinking about that, we recognize that in order to create, and let me define create, what we wanted was more walkable, sustainable communities, not just in our city center, but across our city. So land use characteristics have been very important to us to create the flexibility to adjust to, if you have a commercial building that's been empty 20, 30, 40 years, how do we repurpose it and still create a process that takes into account community engagement? Because even if it's in your city center where most people work, there's still been ample housing projects going on in our city centers. So the mixed use, making sure that everybody was on board with, if we present this to the council and a developer says they want to do this for this building, does it fit the actual space and support what already exists there? But we've also adopted an adaptive reuse ordinance. And I think this has probably been one of our best tools within our toolbox that allows historic buildings to be preserved as well as restored, and that adaptive reuse by easing certain land and zoning, let me see what word I'm looking for, zoning related development requirements. That has allowed us to be very, very creative.
Mm-hmm. We just have a couple minutes left, and I want to use them to ask you about a few other actors, which you have very briefly touched on, which is, you've been describing things that you can do within your own capacity in the city of Birmingham, changing your zoning. What your state legislature is not always your best friend. What do you need them to do at this point? And then the last thing I want to ask you to address is sort of the same question about the federal government.
Yeah, well, I'll start backwards. The federal government is doing its part. I want to thank the Biden-Harris administration just for everything they've done for mayors across the nation. Think about the American Rescue Plan Act for a second. Prior to this act, cities, federal dollars would come to the state, and then the state could do whatever it wants as it relates to disbursement of where those dollars went. You and I both know politically, this blue and red faction, or this suburbia rural versus urban fight, and urban areas are left out when those governors don't necessarily agree with who the president is at the time. ARPA changed the game for all of that. Federal tax dollars came directly to cities, and within those ARPA dollars, we kickstarted so many projects related to direct growth related to housing in our community. It has been a game changer, including the Affordable Housing Trust Fund I told you about. That $10 million came from ARPA dollars. If the Biden-Harris administration didn't think about urban areas and didn't include funding going directly to cities, this conversation with you would be extremely hard because I don't know solutions I could provide to you. So that's the second half of your question. The first part of your question was the state. Well, where do I start? And how do I say this in the most judicious, nicest way as possible? With Birmingham being a blueberry and tomato soup. I put it to you this way. We don't have home rule. And so, unfortunately, that requires us to take off our political hat and tell our legislators down in Montgomery, where the state capitol is, during the session, these are the tools we need to change quality of life in our community, to actually help community related to housing. Our urban needs are not necessarily the same as suburban rural Alabama, but that doesn't make us in competition, nor does that make us a foe. So we need your help. And some of the help we've been able to leverage based on what I've just described to you is, now that we have this Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we still need the enabling act from the state to allow us to use this. Mm-hmm. Another tool from the state is the local land bank. We had to get permission from the state. Mm-hmm. And now we need to go back to the state and say, hey, we need you to accelerate the time period here.
Yeah.
You're allowing these dilapidated properties to sit 5 to 7 years. We need your help to decrease that to 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I greatly appreciate you bringing this perspective of how a bunch of these issues play out on the ground, and particularly in Birmingham. And I think this has sort of set up some context that will make it, easier and more interesting to discuss the rest of these issues around the country over the next hour or so. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy now, and hopefully everyone can join me in thanking the mayor for his time.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone. We're going to transition now to our the next segment of our event today, which is going to be a panel discussion between Vincent Reina from the White House Council of Economic Advisors and one of the authors of the paper that Wendy just introduced about converting brown offices into green apartments, Stijn van Nieuwerburgh. So welcome. And I'm just going to kick us off with a few opening remarks while Vincent and Stijn come back to join us. So we're here today to talk about 3 converging problems. The first is the housing crisis. According to Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, the share of U.S. renter households that spend more than 1/3 of their income on housing reached an all-time record high in 2021. An incredible 21.6 million households, which is almost half of all the households that rent in the country, or 17% of all U.S. households, are spending more than 1/3 of their income on housing. The rental housing crisis is no longer just in higher cost metros with large low-income populations like Miami and Los Angeles, but now in historically affordable metros like, as we just heard, Birmingham. There are 2 key drivers. First, rents are rising faster than incomes. Second, the stock of low rent units has fallen almost 10 percentage points in the last 10 years, even after adjusting for inflation. However, at the same time, rising interest rates mean that even higher income renters are facing a new barrier to homeownership. According to the Joint Center, the estimated annual income needed to afford median homeownership costs rose 20% to $17,000 just between March 2022 and March 2023. In addition, the supply of homes for sale remains at near record lows. The second problem is the disruption of the office commercial real estate market by the surge in hybrid and remote work. The scale of vacancy in some of the country's largest office submarkets is vast. 50 million square feet vacant in Midtown in New York, which is 863 empty football fields stacked on top of each other, and more empty nearby in Midtown South and the Financial District. Another 670 football fields unplayed in downtown Washington, D.C., almost 300 fallow fields in downtown Seattle, and so on. The lost foot traffic of office workers is killing retailers, changing the sense of order on the streets, and could take down entire transit systems. And finally, climate change continues to manifest in complex and disruptive ways. The crisis at the Panama Canal is only the latest example of the ways in which too many carbon emissions are reshaping our climate and thus our world. But did you know that almost 1/3 of US emissions come from real estate? And older buildings emit more. These crises are converging in the urban core, where buildings are older, office-using occupations are concentrated, and housing costs are higher. Is there an opportunity here for an elegant solution? So I'm a skeptic on this issue. I've called office to residential solution a very costly way to get just a fraction of the supply we need. But Vincent, can you tell us more about what the White House sees as the opportunity here? Vincent, I don't have sound from you.
There we go. Do you have sound for me now?
Yes.
There we go. Right. Well, first, thank you for having me here today. Really wonderful to join you, Stijn, and the many other great panelists here. So I want to take a step back because what we'd like to think is our recent conversion announcement that we announced last week and our thoughts in the space is really kind of rooted in a broader set of work. So the President and the White House are committed to addressing our housing supply and affordability needs. That's why in May 2022, the White House launched its Housing Supply Action Plan. The plan set a path for federal actions across a broad set of areas, right? First, reducing barriers to building housing, like restrictive and costly land use and zoning rules, right? We put out the $85 million pro-housing no vote from HUD, created incentives and over $10 billion of competitive funding to reduce land use and zoning barriers. We've expanded financing for affordable, efficient, and resilient housing. I want to thank the mayor for all his great work and also for his note there, right? We're really proud about the tremendous flexibility offered through state and local fiscal recovery funds and the ways localities are using it. There's over 2,500 projects coming through those state and local fiscal recovery project funds. In addition, Home ARP is funding over 20,000 units, right? We have some pretty exciting opportunities through IRA, new funding to invest in our housing stock. For example, the other week, we announced that we awarded over $100 million from HUD through the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever, to help renovate the homes of more than 1,500 low-income families to be zero energy and climate resilient. And we know that's more needed. That's why the president proposed a really ambitious and bold $150 billion housing budget, the largest housing budget proposal in decades that has a broad suite of housing aspects to it. And finally, we're making our programs work better, right? We're improving the way subsidy layering works. Recently, hopefully you saw we allow a portion of ADU rental income count towards FHA mortgages and a broad set of other things around the tax credit program and other areas. So our thoughts around commercial to residential conversions and transit-oriented development really reflect that broad and comprehensive approach, right? Agree with you, Tracy. Conversions are not a panacea, but they're a really critical piece of addressing our broader housing supply and affordability needs. There's no one simple solution here, right? We need to be firing on all cylinders, and there's a real opportunity to do this here. Stijn and his colleagues really explained the landscape and complexities well in their paper, and their optimism and skepticism is one we share, but the reality is if even a fraction of commercial properties convert, that would help our housing supply needs as well as local and regional economies. And these conversions help address our affordable housing needs. We often also think about, you pointed to the fact that buildings are contributed important part of our overall greenhouse gas emissions levels. We often focus on building emissions during the operations phase, but we know there's a lot of embodied carbon in buildings as well. So conversions really present an adaptive reuse opportunity to meet our emissions goals, right? Both through the construction phase, reuse, and also through the operations phase as well. We also know that commercial properties are proximate to transit often, which presents another real emissions reduction related opportunity. So what we were trying to do here and in our announcement last week is really fill a critical financing gap. And I'm confident that actually the suite of resources we're putting together really complement what Stijn and team have proposed and also put together in their calculator to both enable these transactions to happen, but also to make sure they actually could be affordable for the lowest income households and reduce building emissions. So I can give you a really quick rundown of what those things are. Hopefully you'll check out the fact sheet, but DOT issued guidance to make it easier to use up to $35 billion of lending capacity for low cost loans or guarantees to be used for conversions near transit, as well as broader housing supply and projects near transit. This will significantly reduce the cost of lending and the access to capital in this space for these large-scale properties in a really dynamic and unprecedented way. DOT also released guidance to make it easier for transit agencies to transfer properties to local governments, nonprofits, and for-profits at no cost. HUD highlighted ways that CDBG and others can be used to leverage in the space. I can go on, but overall, this announcement really was we put together a guide that highlights over 20 programs that can be used. And to us, it's reflective of the fact that these conversions are not simple, they're not easy, but they're actually really important. And we have a unique opportunity here. And we're optimistic that with federal tools and resources and capacity support from our end, that these things can actually happen.
Vincent, tell me a little bit more about the transit angle here. I'm intrigued by the logic and the attractiveness of below market rate financing in a time when many projects aren't penciling just because of the higher cost of capital right now.
That's exactly right. And so this is one of the things we're particularly excited about, and I think really shows the administration's view that like housing is connected to all these other things, right? And the relationship between housing and transit has been really at the forefront of a lot of DOT actions across the board, including like the Reinvest in Community and Neighborhoods Project grants that came out. Their policy statement actually directly speaks to this connection. And so the TIFIA and RIF programs are just really wonderful and hopefully the dramatically used program that have tremendous lending authority to really be active in this space. You have to be proximate to transit, but proximate to transit is something actually a lot of our existing built environment already is, right? And we actually know we have land, and often vacant land, actually right next to transit, right? So we have this really powerful opportunity of land disposition, right? We have this powerful opportunity of lending authority, both at below interest rates, but also at scale, right? These are large loans. Those are loans that are often difficult to get, very costly to get. And what this is doing is really presenting a unique opportunity to lean into development there, acknowledging that it could really meet multiple of our goals, right? Housing supply, housing affordability, building emissions, and really have a lot of positive spillover effects and avoid that doom loop, right? That Stijn and others have referred to in a lot of areas, right? It's really kind of hitting multiple things at the same time.
What would be a typical size of a TIFIA or RIF transaction? What kind of dollars are we talking about here and what rates?
So the exact rates vary, but they're based on Treasury rates, right? So they're below market interest rates that vary. But overall, I've seen current numbers, in the 5% so ranges, right? And similarly, though, I would say that one of the things we highlighted in our guidebook is the Section 108 program that similarly has very low rates, right? And allows you to leverage your CDBG funds for loan guarantees up to 5 times your CDBG allocation, right? The city of Cleveland's actually using that already for a conversion directly downtown. So what we're talking about is really below market rates. Don't quote me on the 5%, but just we know that it's in that general area, right? And also the scale, to be honest, is very large. We're talking about tens and hundreds of millions of dollar deals, right? That can actually be financed with these loans and loan guarantees.
So, folks, you heard it here first. Low interest rate loans available. I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in what you're here to tell us about today, Vincent. But I'm also intrigued by this new logic that you're presenting around the case for office to residential conversion, given that it's really important that we maximize land use that's in places that are already served by transit. That's a key piece of the logic around the green case for office to residential conversion, because the single biggest sectoral contribution to emissions in the United States is transportation. But as I said in my framing remarks, we know that another huge piece comes directly from real estate itself. And so, Stijn, I'd like to bring you into the conversation here to speak to that piece of the green case for office to housing conversion. Can you tell us a little bit more about the proposal that you described in your paper?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tracy. And I want to start up the top by thanking the Hamilton Project for this opportunity to provide this paper and acknowledge my co-authors, Arpit Gupta from NYU and Candy Martinez from Columbia here. So what we do in the paper is essentially 3 things, right? So we begin by sort of motivated by these 3 challenges that you laid out at the top. We have too much office, we have too little housing. So there's this question of, can we convert some of this existing office stock into housing? And so the first thing we do is to ask, realistically, what fraction of office buildings are amenable to conversion based on their physical attributes, right? And so, to your point that this is not a silver bullet, we end up concluding something on the order of 10% of the existing office stock is potentially convertible. Now, that's not a small number either, and that's sort of where my optimism is coming from, that could potentially create something like 370,000 new housing units in the United States. So not a small number, a year and a half worth of supply. The second thing we do in the paper is we calculate the economic feasibility of these conversions, right? And that's sort of where we go through the hard work of modeling these conversions. There's a lot of parameters. The interest rate environment obviously plays a major role into that. And so, we're sort of proud to announce in collaboration with Hamilton that we have a web-based calculator that's available and that will let policymakers as well as developers sort of understand the financial returns on these conversions case by case, because there's a lot of specificity in each and every case. And then the third thing we do to answer your question is we think about what are the policy levers that are possible here, both at the federal, at the state, and at the local level. And I want to make an important point here, which is, doing nothing is a very bad option here, right? Government intervention is justified based on the negative externalities that are associated with office and retail vacancy. And conversions, whether it be to housing or to something else, could be healthcare, could be mixed use, could be, pickleball courts for all I care, right? We got to reimagine our downtown areas. Now, typically, it's going to be necessary for government intervention in case we're talking about housing conversions and housing conversions with an affordable component. And this is sort of where, again, our calculator comes in handy. We could basically figure out how large is the gap, the funding gap, in the context of affordable housing, and how many taxpayer dollars are necessary to make the numbers pencil. And I think that's going to ensure that the taxpayer dollars are both well targeted and effective. We don't spend dollars where it's not needed, and we sort of understand exactly, how many dollars it would take to provide a certain level of affordability, a certain fraction of affordable housing. Now, to your point about the green aspect of these conversions, like you said, there's brown office buildings, typically older office buildings that are, that are sort of large sources of emission. A lot of local governments, like New York City, have already taken action. Local Law 97 is coming into effect in New York City January 1st. That's 2 months from now. And it's gonna, there's gonna require these office buildings to be fined or to basically remediate their greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so, sort of, there's an opportunity here to take this confluence of factors, take these old brown offices, turn them into green apartments. Now, that costs extra money, and this is where we think, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act could play an important role. And in our paper, we sort of single out 5 different parts of that Inflation Reduction Act, 5 different provisions where there's federal resources available to help subsidize the green aspects of these conversions. And in particular, if I can, sort of want to encourage the administration. I'm very encouraged, by the way, by what Vincent has been talking about. And I think the federal government has put together an incredibly comprehensive and coordinated plan to facilitate these conversions. I think there's even more that the administration could do here in terms of using, let's say, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, to help fund some of these provisions as well, because some of these provisions are climate justice, low-income households. How is providing clean, affordable housing in low-income communities, how is that not climate justice, right? So I think this is sort of a perfect use case for some of those dollars.
So, Stijn, what I'm hearing you say is that there are multiple parts to the public sector role in understanding the logic of office to residential conversion. One is internalizing the cost of the carbon that old office buildings emit. That is not currently internal and is not part of office owners' incentives, except in cities like New York that have already taken regulatory action in that area. Then 2, addressing the cost of conversion, either bringing it down or helping to pay for it. And then 3, asking hard questions about who will benefit from these conversions, in addition to the public placemaking case for ensuring the vitality of the urban core. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you learned in your paper in terms of what the potential fiscal impacts on cities of O to R could be?
Yes, I think you articulated it very well. I think that's sort of the case for intervention. And one thing we learned about the fiscal implications, one way I like, I've come around to this view that the taxpayer is a part owner in every building in every city. And that is because of property taxes, right? Property taxes are an important part of the expenses for the landlord, but an important source of revenue for cities. And so we, the taxpayer, own all these offices that some of which have now become functionally obsolete because of remote work, the adoption of remote work and hybrid work. And so we are staring at a declining tax revenue stream from these offices. Part of the conversion idea is to replace that declining tax revenue stream with an increasing tax revenue stream. Once that brown office becomes a green apartment, it's going to have a much larger tax revenue potential and an increasing one as opposed to a declining one. And so the difference between these two tax revenue streams is basically the benefit to the taxpayer. And so now we could think of that resource. This is a resource that we've created, and we can use some of that resource that we've created to fund some of that can go towards affordability, towards funding a component of that conversion that becomes affordable, right? And I think that's sort of a powerful way of thinking about it. We are investing as a community some of these additional dollars that we've gained from that conversion into affordability.
So, I mean, let's dig in a little bit more on how we should understand affordability in the context of this topic. And Vincent, I'd like to bring you back in here. We know, from the research that I was just citing, that the affordability crisis is concentrated in the lowest income households. But is that who can be served by office to residential conversion? How have you thought about affordability in the context of OTAR? Stijn, let's start with you and then we'll go to Vincent.
Okay, absolutely, right. So I think you're right that affordability is sort of a deeper issue, the lower income, the folks we're talking about. That said, it is an issue, as you mentioned at the top of your remarks, across the income spectrum. And in fact, it's never been more, the calculus of owning versus renting has never been more unfavorable towards owning than it is today, right? And so there is a large segment of the population sort of deep into above average income that is renting now. And I think they are in our large cities, even folks making 120% of area median income are still struggling to afford to live in these cities, right? So I think there's definitely a use case for providing affordable housing, even for people making somewhere between 80 and 120% of AMI. And I think this is the realm where these conversions could play a role. Now, to create even deeper affordability is going to cost more money. It's not that it cannot be done, it's just going to cost the taxpayer more money. And so this will become a political decision in terms of, just how much subsidy do we want to provide to these conversions. And that's going to be a function of how deeply we want that affordability to be. The other point I want to make is that not all of these office conversions need to be conversions to traditional housing. You could imagine conversions to, for example, co-living spaces. And co-living spaces, let's define them as apartment buildings where people share kitchens, maybe to share bathrooms, right? But they have their own individual bedroom. That's the type of living arrangement that can provide housing at a much lower cost. And so that's an example of living arrangements that, by the way, a lot of young professionals love because of the social interaction of these type of spaces. So there's a lot of demand for this, and people are doing this already informally by rooming with two or three other adults in 3-bedroom apartments in New York City, all the time. So let's sort of formalize this type of housing arrangement. Let's make it legal. And let's create naturally affordable housing without subsidy, right? So I think by being creative about the types of housing we provide, we can sort of we can broaden this concept of affordability.
I'm intrigued by what you're saying here, Stijn, because it makes me wonder if also there's a fourth converging crisis that this solution could respond to, which is the loneliness epidemic.
Absolutely. I think that is an interesting angle here.
Vincent, tell me a little bit more about how you understand affordability in the context of office to residential.
Yeah, so I would just say a couple things. First is one of our goals here was really to make these deals both financially viable, but to drive down the cost of financing to actually be able to make those units affordable, right? And so insofar as our financing options reduce the cost of development and create more security around it, which also reduce the cost, right? On multiple levels, we're reducing costs that in theory could drive down the debt levels, which allow for you to rent to lower income households. That said, we're very clear-eyed to acknowledge too that, for the lowest income households, those incomes are often very low. And to Stein's point, you often need additional resources. which is why we're really seeing this as a part of our broader housing supply and affordability agenda, right? We're putting forward proposals on new project-based Section 8 contracts, voucher expansion, voucher guarantees for low-income veterans, the youth aging out of foster care, right? Really like showing that those tools are critical for leveraging in opportunities like this. We know that conversions already are leveraging the low-income housing tax credit program, the historic tax credit. Any one of these deals is going to probably involve a complex capital stack. And Tracy, I know you know affordable housing development well, right? Every affordable housing development involves a capital stack. And the reality is that we have a broad set of tools. This is the latest to the suite. We are advocating for more needed, but we're really optimistic that municipalities can and should make it a priority to focus on affordability, acknowledging all those externalities, acknowledging the need, and seeing the real opportunity here to make sure that the capital stack and the subsidies involved can actually make this pencil out and increase actual supply for the lowest income households.
I wonder also if there is an opportunity for housing authorities to directly partner in office to residential conversions as a way for them to obtain new inventory without having to build it themselves.
I mean, I'm looking forward to that concept paper, Tracy, so hopefully you write it. And I will just say, though, to your point there, like, you know, and to the mayor's point earlier, you know, we have resources now that are really pushing us in new and exciting spaces of innovation to think of things like that, right? To see new areas of opportunity, see new areas of partnership, public-private partnership, and activity in spaces that I think are open the door for ideas like those. So definitely look forward to seeing you put some pen to that idea, hopefully, Tracy.
Thanks for the homework assignment, Vincent. We have a question from the audience that I think that we need to grapple with as we talk about how to understand the green case for office to residential conversion. So we heard from an audience several audience members who want to know, like, why not just demolish obsolete buildings and replace them with new ones? Is it really okay to be spending money on this? And isn't, like, you know, demolition and replacement, isn't that how it's done in other international models of flexible built environments that have abundant housing, like Tokyo?
I'm happy to say a word on this. There is an enormous amount of embedded carbon in existing buildings, right? And so the steel, the concrete, all of that is carbon that we've already expended. And so the option of demolition, it basically would sort of have us redo all of that and have all these additional emissions from concrete and steel for the new building. It turns out you can never make up those additional carbon, that additional amount of carbon from new construction by having sort of more green and more efficiently operating buildings in the future, right? So you might think this building will be more energy efficient going forward. I'm going to cut back, and that's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for a very long time. It turns out the present value of all those emissions is not enough to compensate for the additional carbon from the construction, right? So basically, you know, you can sort of save 50 to 75% of the carbon by repurposing existing buildings. So I think that's sort of the green case. I think the other green case for this is the point that you made earlier, which is, you know, like urban living is environmentally friendly living, right? People walk more, they take public transit, there's more density. So sort of the option of letting our downtowns fall apart and not take advantage of that, I think, is another important part for this green case here.
Vincent, do you have colleagues that have taken a look at this?
I mean, this is definitely a space we're actively thinking about. I think hopefully you saw our fact sheet the other week focusing on housing and energy costs. We're really trying to blend and braid all of our resources together, particularly with the opportunities through the Inflation Reduction Act, which appreciate the push before Stijn on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, right? There's a lot of really unique opportunities right now. One of the things we actually released in our fact sheet was new guidance from Treasury on ways that IRA funds could be used to advance multifamily housing, and that could really map on well to this conversion space. So I'll just say, though, too, you know, one thing that's clear is not every commercial property can be converted, and that's the kind of core of Stijn's paper. And so I think the reality is there is a set of properties that are really ripe for adaptive reuse present a real opportunity. And when coupled with these other financing tools and resources, particularly with stuff coming into IRA and other sources, really can meet those emissions goals, acknowledge those embodied carbon aspects, do adaptive reuse well, and reduce emissions and energy costs going forward.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I started this webinar as a skeptic, but you guys are winning me over a little bit here. This is a fascinating conversation. I can't bring up Tokyo, though, without asking, Stijn, as you and your colleagues worked on this paper, did you look abroad at all for lessons on how to think about office to residential conversion? What do we need to know from the world?
We did, and one case study, if you like, that I would like to share with the audience, which I found fascinating, is the case study of the Netherlands. Right, so the Netherlands had, like many countries, built too much office, and then when the financial crisis happened, saw itself with this excess office inventory. And basically, in the decade that followed, it's set up a systematic response and a systematic office to residential conversion plan. And 10 years in a row, it produced 10,000 new housing units each year, 100,000 housing units. It's a small country, so this was 10% of the housing supply. So 10% of the housing supply in the Netherlands came from office to residential conversions. And the fascinating thing about it is, as they were going through this and as they were doing more and more of it, initially it was hard, and initially it was the government that sort of made some of its own buildings available for conversion to try to figure out how does this work. Then they figured out sort of the logistics of this. Then they figured out the financing of this. Then they set up a task force within the federal government that would proactively go into the municipalities and tell them, hey, here you have this building. We think it might be a valuable conversion candidate. And by the way, here's how you get the financing. Here's how you do the engineering. Here's how you do X, Y, Z. And it became, and the longer they did this, the better they got at it, and sort of the more opportunity they saw. And I think that's sort of that experience actually made me much more optimistic about this. And I'm actually incredibly encouraged by what I saw from the White House, because it feels like a systematic response like that, where there is a task force within the DOT, for example, that it can help municipalities work through this and help them. And I think the more we do this, the easier this is going to get.
I'm intrigued by what you're saying here too, because, I study commercial real estate, and, I can tell you that adaptive reuse is a very niche specialty within real estate. Most developers don't know how to do it. And the developers that do tend to be those that are like passionate about historic preservation. Like they're kind of like, they might be a little kooky and they really love old buildings. And they do it because they love it, not because it's always like the thing that makes the most sense to do. So I do think that there's a need for the sector to learn how to do this. Vincent, what Stijn's describing is technical assistance. Can you tell us what the federal government is planning regarding this?
Yes. So one of the things we leaned into in the announcement is the fact that DOT has direct technical assistance on how to use their TIFIA and RIF loan products. And that's very much going to be a part of working with them. Also, HUD has new pools of technical assistance that is specifically also going to be targeted to helping people understand how to use their broad set of financing tools. Again, there's even things like the mortgage insurance programs, the 221D, enter the next number, right, programs that they have that have been used in this space. And so between HUD and DOT, and actually each agency often has like a pool of funds that essentially is dedicated towards this kind of technical assistance. That said, we're doing a series of workshops, and those workshops are really tailored to municipalities and developers to have them really understand the programs. They're going to be overviews of the programs. There are also case studies of how some of this stuff has come together and the ways we can imagine the new tools working in these spaces. And so we're really trying to pull these pieces together as much as possible. In our announcement, we also highlighted a couple of peer-to-peer learning opportunities. The National Association of Counties and the American Planning Association are both kind of doing convenings and peer-to-peer learning to help folks learn from this space, because there's also a lot of local land use and zoning rules, local opportunities with financing, funding opportunities that really layer on in important ways here. And so all to say is we're really excited to engage more on this, and hopeful that we could really bring these tools to bear. As you said, this is not easy, right? This takes, as to Stein's point, a concerted effort, and we're excited to working through all the kinks and cracks to make sure this actually comes to fruition.
Yeah, it's not easy and it's not free, but it seems like it's also not impossible. Stijn, can you tell us what you learned in your paper in terms of like what might you were throwing out numbers about the total number of units that office to residential conversion could possibly produce, but what's it going to cost us?
Again, I think the way our proposal thinks about this question is it sort of starts off by saying, what is this office asset that you're buying when you're planning this conversion worth, right? And we're sort of starting from the premise that the value of that office has fallen substantially. And I think as is playing out in the real world right now. And then sort of the key parameter, and then we're sort of asking in a first step, is it feasible to convert this defunct office into market rate housing? Right, and we do this for a generic calculation of, let's call it, a Class B office in the largest 20 cities in the United States, and that's sort of what our calculator does. And in many cases, the answer is yes. Okay, so there is a profitable conversion to market rate housing that is feasible, given reasonable cost estimates and reasonable market rents for the apartments. And then the second step of the calculation is, well, what if you want to have some units in that building be affordable? And then there's basically a parameter you get to set in our calculator, how many units do you want to be affordable? At what level do you want them to be affordable? And then what is the funding gap that, typically the answer at that point becomes there is a funding gap. And then the question becomes, so how large is the funding gap? And then there's a range of tools you can use within the calculator for bridging the financing gap. One of which is property tax abatements. Another one is the IRA subsidy that we sort of conceptualize in the calculator. Another one is subsidized debt. And so then you can sort of play around with these parameters to see how much do you need to fill. And again, the answer depends on the specifics of the question. How deeply affordable, how many affordable units? The deeper the affordability, the more affordable units, the larger the subsidy needs to be.
And can your calculator tool also be customized to work for different regional housing markets, understanding that like asking rents do vary quite a bit from place to place, for example?
Yeah, so it's set up for the largest, 10 or 20 markets. And for each one of them, we basically provide median income in that market. We provide the market rent for the apartment in that market, the cost of the office in that market, and the construction cost. Those are sort of the main parameters we vary across different cities.
Okay. Vincent, what are we going to do for everybody else who isn't in the top 20 housing markets in the U.S.?
Well, that's something we care about. This is affecting big cities and small towns, right? And the reality is the financing tools we put forward and then CA apply in all those settings, right? And so we're really eager to see this work in bustling big city downtowns and main streets all across the country. So our tools cross the spectrum, and I think all of our agency partners are really keen to see that be the case. USDA is a partner in our work here as well, both in thought and in actions as well. One of their programs is in our guidebook, and so we're really committed to an interagency approach to make sure that everyone can really access these important resources.
So let's conclude by helping point people to where they can go to follow up on. I heard about workshops. I heard about a calculator. Where does everyone go to get these resources?
So the calculator is on the Brookings website, on the Hamilton project website, and it's live.
All right. And with our incredible SEO, I know that anyone could just Google Brookings Hamilton conversion calculator and you're going to find it right away. Vincent, what about you? How do we get everyone plugged into these workshops?
Yeah, so on the base level, right, check out the White House fact sheet, right? There's more information there. I think there's going to be more announcements coming out from DOT and HUD around TA opportunities. The workshops itself, we're setting those up right now, and we're going to be doing a blast around those as well, and doing kind of a public outreach. That said, I imagine a lot of people on this call as well are already in touch with a lot of our federal partners, and I didn't have the way of getting in touch with them. I know since our announcement, several of them have already said they've seen an uptick, right? And so I think our hope here is that, developers, municipalities, interested parties engage directly with the agencies who are the experts on these tools and who will be the kind of key partners in having these things come together.
Okay. Well, we're at time. So Stijn and Vincent, I want to thank you so much for this conversation today. I learned a lot. I'm not going to say my mind has fully been changed, but you have given me a lot to think about. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Wendy.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I am gonna pause for a second until I see my picture come up. Well, oh, I see Laurie. All right, I'm just gonna cross my fingers that it's all working. And I'm guessing if you have found us, then you do indeed know how to find either Hamilton Project or website. I promise you it is very easy to find. I want it to be going forward, so give us feedback. My internet connection is full. Switching gears, being a bigger presence in the rental market for single-family homes. First, tell us what you and Ingrid found there, and then we'll turn to the policy proposals that you all have in mind.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, and thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to write about this topic. So basically, what we found is that we looked at recent trends in terms of large investors in the market. We found that large investors are about 3% of the single-family rental market overall, but they tend to be concentrated in certain areas. So they own about 27% of the single-family rentals in Atlanta, 22% in Jacksonville, and 20% in Charlotte. They tend to buy homes that are newer and larger than other single-family rentals in the markets in which they operate. They tend to buy homes in neighborhoods with above-average rental incomes. They tend to target homes that need repair as they have a large comparative advantage in doing the repair. We also discovered that there's a lot we don't know about investor behavior. So we don't know the impact of large institutional investors on rents in the area. We know that mega investors tend to target fast-growing areas for better returns. These are areas in which both prices and rents would have increased more than in other areas on average. It's hard to determine how much they've actually contributed to the increase in rents in that area. In those areas. So work by CoreLogic has shown that investor activity actually lags rent increases. That is, investors are reacting to the increases by increasing their share in the area. When we look at rent increases of institutional investors versus other smaller investors, we find that institutional investors do have rent increases that are marginally larger, but more importantly, they seem quicker to raise rents when rents are going up and quicker to mute rent increases when rents are decelerating. When we look at the management of delinquent tenants, we find that there's a lot we don't know there. We do know that mega investors send out more eviction notices than smaller investors. This is a technique for rent collection. It's unclear, however, if they actually evict more, as we have no data whatsoever on actual evictions. That said, eviction filings can be detrimental in and of itself, as it's a factor for some landlords when screening tenants. When we look at tenant screening and who actually rents in these units, we know that large mega investors tend to rely heavily on screening algorithms rather than gut feelings. They generally use self-showing technologies and rarely meet the tenant. They'll check previous evictions, criminal history, and often credit score. Smaller landlords tend to meet the tenant and directly show the apartment themselves, so they sort of get a gut feeling about the tenant. When you look at the tenant experience and maintenance issues, this is an area that's just absolutely ripe for further research. There's no data on whether large landlords do a better or worse job on maintenance. They tend to rely on in-house property management operations. They definitely have staff available 24/7, and they've incorporated technology into the maintenance process. So, for example, the mega investors generally have a maintenance truck that can handle a large proportion of the repairs on the spot. However, the lack of a personal connection may make it harder for the landlord to understand the tenant's needs and for the tenant to hold the landlord accountable. So again, we spent a lot of time looking at investor behavior and discovered that there's just a lot we don't know.
And so I think that's going to play a role in what you propose. So Ingrid, now let's turn it to you. So given your findings, tell us what you and Laurie propose for this sector.
Yeah, and let me just add my thanks to you and to your team at the Hamilton Project for inviting us to write this paper. I think I can speak for Laurie too, that we learned a lot in doing this, but there's a lot that we didn't learn. So that's sort of point. I mean, I think writing this paper, but let me say it's sort of our policy recommendations coming out of our analysis are really threefold. They're really three sets. And the first concerns transparency. And writing this paper, I think, underscored for us how little we actually know about rental properties and their ownership. It seems like ownership of rental properties is one of the best kept secrets. And so what we call for is sort of the widespread adoption and enforcement of rental registries that basically require landlords to register their properties with the local governments. In the case of LLCs, importantly, right, report on the names and the ultimate parent entities, so that jurisdictions can more easily identify owners' full portfolios within jurisdiction. And this is something that, I mean, this would clearly facilitate better research and analysis, right? But it would also benefit local policymakers. And Mayor Woodfin earlier in this event, right, referenced the fact that they really struggled when they found these sort of dilapidated properties that were sort of abandoned. They couldn't figure out who owned them. I mean, this sort of so you can imagine, right, if code inspectors in a local government find a building with a ton of egregious code violations, well, shouldn't they be able to then proactively inspect the other buildings owned by that owner? And they don't have the ability to do that right now because the web of sort of ownership is so, complicated and hidden. So we think that such transparency would benefit renters too. I mean, there's an argument, right? Renters should be able to know who their landlord is. They should know who they can contact when concerns arise, when they need repairs. We also suggest that these registries could be publicly available and searchable, so that renters would also empower renters in their housing searches to be able to understand what the record is. I mean, landlords can see the records of tenants, but that to empower tenants with more information about their landlords. And when we talk about the fact that, I mean, this is ultimately sort of would be a local government role, but we talk about the ways that we suggest that the federal government could, importantly, we think, develop a model registry that would help local jurisdictions more quickly implement registries and ensure that the information collected through those registries is adequate and it's consistent across jurisdictions. So that would allow you to really people to understand the scale of ownership. And the federal government could also incentivize the creation and adoption of these registries through conditioning competitive grants on creating and enforcing such systems. So those are the first set of recommendations. The second set is concerns new regulations to be imposed on institutional owners. And we argue that policymakers should impose stricter rules and regulations on institutional owners who have the size and the scale and the organizational infrastructure to enable them to sort of bear the cost of a variety of actions that really could help to serve and protect tenants. Right? And for example, we argue that large scale owners could be required to, for instance, accept housing choice vouchers, which it's legal in many parts of the countries to refuse, and many landlords do refuse to serve tenants who are paying part of their rent with housing choice vouchers. We suggest that they could be required to accept security insurance in lieu of security deposits, or to spread security deposits over several months so that security deposits don't become a barrier to entry for renters. We recommend that these larger scale landlords be required to offer rent reporting to tenants to allow them to build credit and improve their credit scores, that they be required to disclose fees in a transparent and understandable manner before a renter signs a lease, that they allow tenants potentially to pay their rents in 2 monthly installments, and potentially that they require that regulators require good cause and or more notice at least before filing an eviction. So that's sort of the second bucket, right? The third set of policies really concerns renovation financing for owner occupants. And this is about basically leveling the playing field between institutional purchasers and individual homeowners. And that, the current programs that are available to prospective home buyers who want to buy properties that need renovation are very cumbersome, and they have a very high denial rate. And so we call for changes in renovation financing offered by the FHA and the GSEs to make it easier for individuals or individual homeowners to compete against institutional investors in trying to buy homes that need renovations. And that's in a nutshell. More details in the paper. I think Wendy may be frozen.
So, Ingrid, all right, so that's fantastic. All of us have thought a fair bit about the effectiveness of policies to help renters during the pandemic. How would this information so if we had this information in the would have been as we tried to help renters in distress? I think that's a question for Ingrid.
So is this how the information about ownership would have helped during COVID, helped distress renters during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, so you talked a fair bit about how better information about these large institutional investors would help the tenants, but I don't think you talked as much about how it would help policymakers to have all of this information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it would help them again in being able to, just to reiterate, it would help them to be able to, if they see one building that has like egregious code violations, they could then proactively inspect the other buildings. But during COVID, many cities struggled to deliver emergency rental assistance to tenants because they couldn't identify the owners of those properties. And that's something that just seems crazy, right? I mean, rental rent. And so I think the widespread availability of, rental registries that are clear and that are enforced would have really sped up the allocation of rental assistance and would have allowed for needed help to get into the pocket of renters much, much more quickly.
And so, Laurie, a question for you. So on the one hand, you guys aren't proposing actually limiting ownership of these single family homes for rent among large investors. But on the other hand, you guys are proposing additional requirements on them. So how would you answer the criticism that you're basically going to make their business unprofitable?
So we've thought very carefully about how to balance the rights of landlords and tenants. So we've deliberately chosen items that a landlord can do at very low cost that would enhance the tenant experience. So, for example, rent reporting may be cumbersome to initially set up, but it's going to cost less than $2 a month per tenant, likely less with skilled negotiations. Security deposit insurance is paid for by the renter. The landlord has to administer it. Transparent leases don't cost money other than the initial design. So we've deliberately thought about proposals that would enhance the tenant experience while not costing the landlords a lot of money.
All right, I just turned myself on to reassure everybody that I'm not, that I'm still here. But now I've turned my picture off again. All right, so last couple of minutes. So to both of you, what single point do you want readers to take away?
I'll go first. So
Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. So the notion of the single family institutional investor has just generated a ton of emotion on both sides. Those who believe that the large mega investors push up rents for the community while failing to maintain those properties. On the other hand, there are those that believe that these mega investors are giving renters the opportunity to live in nicer renovated properties than would otherwise be available. Despite the huge amount of emotion on both sides and these deeply held views, our research highlighted how little we actually know about investor behavior by size tier and its impact on renters and the rental market.
Yeah, and I would just add really quickly
Great.
that I think people tend to think about renters as all living in multifamily buildings. So I think that sort of fundamentally, the most fundamental point is just that a lot of renters live in single family homes, and that single family rentals are actually a critical part of the rental housing landscape. They allow renters the ability to live in larger homes and to live in communities that are closed off to multifamily buildings. And also, I will just say, if I sneak in one more, which is that sort of over time, I mean, even back in like 1993, we show in the paper that a third of all occupied rental units were single family homes. And now that number is like inched up slightly to like 34.5%. So it's sort of like we haven't seen, this has really sort of been the single family rental market has been consistently an important part of the rental market, and that is not new.
Well, excellent. I thank you both for producing a really useful and really proposal. I encourage everybody to go look at it. Oh, and they actually turned me off. They turned off my video. How funny. So thank you to everybody and to the mayor. And I encourage everybody to the website. Thank you for joining us.